Here's Frank Turek to try to convince us that substance dualism is a coherent idea.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Chinadu. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, my question's this. We humans, we are part body, part soul, and part spirit. So all three in one. Now, we understand that our body is what we physically see. Our soul is our emotions, and our spirit is our spirit man.
I've never heard of that one before. What is a spirit man?
How would we explain the spirit man in layman terms to an unchurched person, maybe an atheist or agnostic?
Okay, good question. Actually, Christian theologians differ over whether it's body and soul or body, soul, and spirit.
What could possibly be the difference between the soul and the spirit? Is the idea that these two are separate taken from Plato, who believed that the soul had three parts, the appetitive part, the spirited part, and the rational part? Is the distinction between the soul and the spirit the same as, or analogous to, the distinction between the spirited part and the rational part of the soul?
So right there's a little bit of ambiguity. Some will say it's two, others will say it's three. Let's just say there's at least a duality, right? We're material beings, but we're also immaterial beings.
What's an immaterial being? Is that the same as a non-physical being? If it is, then it's nonsensical, just like the idea of a physical being is.
And my question would be back to the atheist. How do you explain the idea that there are immaterial realities about us?
Well, I don't deny that there are immaterial things. Energy is immaterial. Space and time are immaterial. I don't know what immaterial realities are, though.
Like consciousness. Where does consciousness come from?
Consciousness is a process carried out by the brain. It's a material process. It's not immaterial because it's an activity carried out by matter.
Like the reason, our ability to reason.
That's also a material phenomenon. It's something the brain does.
The laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, the laws of morality.
The laws of logic and mathematics are inventions. We came up with them to help us describe and organize our experiences, just as we do with any other aspect of language. They don't exist as some non-physical woo-woo platonic forms or anything. And as far as I can tell, there are no laws of morality. There are things that my conscience can't tolerate, but I don't see how what my conscience does indicates the existence of any immaterially existing laws. My conscience is also a neurological and thus material phenomenon.
Where do these laws come from?
The laws of logic and math came from us. We invented them.
These are immaterial laws.
Given that they are the product of material brains, how are they immaterial?
And every atheist I know is upset about something. They think there's some kind of injustice out there in the world.
There are certainly things that upset me, but that doesn't mean that I believe in any kind of objective notion of justice that has some kind of platonic ontology. I don't see how such a thing would even be coherent.
What is justice from an atheistic, materialistic perspective? You might ask, how many atoms or molecules are in the justice, or how many atoms are in the justice molecule? They'll go, wait, but there's no such thing as a justice molecule. I know there's not.
That's like asking how many atoms are in the energy molecule. Does the fact that energy is not made of matter mean that it is made of some kind of non-physical substance? Clearly not. Energy is still a physical phenomenon. I doubt Frank believes that the soul is made out of energy, because if it were, we would be able to detect it empirically. Frank believes the soul is not just immaterial, but also non-physical. It's non-physical things that I consider to be an incoherent notion.
But from your perspective, not you, but the atheist, from your perspective, you're saying everything's made of molecules.
No, I'm not. Energy, space, and time are not made of molecules.
There are self-evident things that aren't made of molecules. Justice, love, morality, logic, reason, consciousness.
These things aren't made of molecules, but they are phenomena that, in their essence, are carried out by molecules, thus making them material phenomena.
All of these things are better explained by theism than they are by atheism.
How does that follow? Even if there is such a thing as non-physical entities, it doesn't at all follow that a god exists. You don't have to be a physicalist to be an atheist. And how would theism explain the existence of the non-physical? Non-physical things exist because there's one really big non-physical thing that created them? Well, why does that exist? I know the typical answer apologists give is that God exists because he is necessarily self-existent. This seems to amount to nothing more than saying God exists because he just does.
So I would turn it back on the person rather than having you trying to explain how this works together, because we really don't know how it works together, but we know it exists.
I don't think apologists even really understand what it means to say that non-physical entities exist. I certainly don't understand what it means to say that something exists if it doesn't exist physically.
Right? We know that we're at least dual beings, that we're body and soul.
No, we don't. We don't even know what that means. And Frank isn't even getting to the biggest problems of dualism, like the interaction problem. How does something non-physical manage to move atoms around without physical energy? And if non-physical entities somehow do move atoms around and control your brain, why can't we see things move around without physical energy being involved? If our souls control our brains, why do our brains show no sign whatsoever of any kind of influence that isn't physical? If our brains don't reason or feel emotion or do any of the things that Frank believes the soul actually does, then what does the brain do? Why do we even have brains if the soul does all of these things?
And for an atheist to deny that, he's actually using an immaterial reality, his mind, to say we're not that.
My mind is an activity carried out by my brain, so in what sense is it immaterial? And again, if my mind is immaterial, what does my brain even do? And why does changing the brain, for example surgically or pharmaceutically, change how people think and feel if it's not the brain that is responsible for thoughts and feelings? Does the brain control the soul as well as the soul controlling the brain? It seems as though Frank doesn't actually explain dualism here. He just says, we don't know how it works, but we know that reason, logic, love, etc. are immaterial. But then he gives no argument to back up that assertion.
Molecules or biology, evolution, it came together.
Yeah.
And it functions.
Right.
In a free will.
I'm not convinced that it does. There's nothing about how the brain works that gives any indication that any decision we make, or anything else that the brain does, is at all free of antecedent deterministic causes.
Now, be that free will a gift of God or a gift of evolution, how do you think of free will? How does free will, man's free will,
we have the
play into
ability.
this?
We have the ability to choose between choices within certain limitations. I can't choose to jump 60 feet in the air, obviously.
What does this mean exactly? We certainly have the ability to imagine different courses of action, and we end up taking one course of action out of multiple that we imagine, but why can't this be an entirely deterministic process? Whenever I consider different courses of action that I can imagine taking, eventually one option motivates me to move in its direction more than the others, and then I do. Nothing about this process seems to me to at all be spontaneous or uncaused. I don't see where the freedom is in that.
But in the Christian worldview, there's a material realm and an immaterial realm. And the immaterial realm deals with laws of logic and consciousness and laws of morality and even laws of nature. In the materialistic worldview, everything's molecules, everything's material, everything's governed by the laws of physics.
What does that have to do with free will? While I don't believe that free will exists because there doesn't seem to be anything that the brain does that is non-deterministic, that doesn't mean that non-deterministic events never happen in physics. Even if we did have free will, we wouldn't need the supernatural to explain it. It could turn out that there are events that happen in the brain non-deterministically, but such events involve quantum indeterminacy, which is entirely physical. So there's no evidence that we have free will, but even if there were, we wouldn't need the supernatural to explain it.
Theism can explain why these immaterial realities exist. Atheists cannot.
I don't think theists can explain why immaterial realities exist, because I have yet to even hear an explanation of what an immaterial reality is that I can recognize as coherent.
But what atheists tend to do is they steal from God's world in order to make their case. So I can't see how you can have free will if there is no immaterial realm.
I don't think we do have free will, but even if we do, we wouldn't need an immaterial realm to exist, because matter is capable of acting non-deterministically in some cases.
If we're just governed by the laws of physics, then everything Michael Shermer says and everything I say is the result of the laws of physics.
Yeah, but the laws of physics are not entirely deterministic. There can be non-determined events that are nonetheless entirely physical.
So why believe what I believe? Why believe what he believes?
What does believability have to do with anything? I guess Frank thinks that free thoughts are somehow more reliable than determined ones, but why would that be the case? If your thoughts are spontaneous rather than determined, how would that make them any more reliable?
I have a question about free will. So if God knows everything, then God already knows who's going to hell and who's going to heaven before he even ever created them, before he created the universe, before he created Adam and Eve.
Absolutely.
So with this viewpoint, how could we have free will at all if everything's already determined?
All right, excellent question. Do you like football?
Yes.
Let's suppose you like NFL football, so you have DirecTV, so you can get, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And NFL Direct Ticket, right? So you can watch all the games on Sunday. One Sunday you're away from the TV, but you record the games that you want to watch later. And let's suppose you're coming home that night and your friend texts you all the scores, and you go, I didn't want to know the scores, but you know them now. And so you get home and you elect to watch one of the games. You already know what the score is going to turn out to be. Question, does that mean the players on the field don't have free will because you know the outcome?
No, because you learn the outcome after it happened. If you knew the outcome before it happened, and you knew it infallibly, then there would be no way for the players to defy that knowledge, and they would therefore have no free will.
No.
Okay, they still freely doing what they're doing on the field.
The problem is they've already done it.
They've already done it, and God's outside of time, so from his perspective, everything has already happened, even though it hasn't on our perspective, because we're in time, he's outside of time.
If there can be an infallible perspective from which everything has already happened before it happens, then we definitely can't have free will, because the outcome of any event is already set in stone before it ever happens. In this scenario, what we see as the future is what God sees as the past. Since that's the case, we are no more free to control the future than we are to control the past. Because from God's perspective, our future is the past. Football players would have no more control over the score of future games than they have over the score of the game sitting on your PVR. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.